What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So go ahead and call on in with your comments and questions. And before the break, we were talking about how the History Channel is running this 4-part series, America's War on Drugs. And the trailers indicate they're actually talking about how the CIA has been bringing these illegal drugs into our country and selling them. And for those who've been following along what's going on all the way back to Iran-Contra, we know that this has been going on, in point of fact. There's a very good book called Compromised, Clinton, Bush, and the CIA by Terry Reid, who was one of the pilots in that smuggling operation. Then there was The Crimes of Mina, which was this article written by Sally Denton and Roger Morris, based on documents they recovered from Barry Seal's car after he was assassinated. And that article was cleared for publication at the Washington Post by the Washington Post's own lawyers. They fact-checked it and said, yes, this is real. The CIA is running drugs, and unfortunately the story was spiked by then managing editor Bob Kaiser, who wouldn't even meet with the reporters. He sent his secretary out to tell them, your story is spiked. And ultimately, it was published in Penthouse magazine. And, of course, the corporate media is out there saying, well, if it's in Penthouse, I mean, you know, you shouldn't pay attention to it. But it was a well-researched story. There have been a lot of books about this stuff. And basically what it is the CIA likes to do things that don't necessarily have congressional permission. And that means they have to come up with the funding for themselves. And what better way for clandestine funding than the drug trade? And they were bringing heroin back into the United States during Vietnam, smuggling it inside the body bags of our dead kids. And because they couldn't go all the way across the Pacific Ocean back then, Hawaii was a stopover. And unfortunately, it corrupted our state government back then, who were all being bribed to look the other way. Some of that corruption lingered into recent times as well. So back in the 1980s, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the story, the CIA was running an operation to manufacture untraceable military weapons, M16s. And the way they did it is they had these various companies that had the ability to do castings and machine work, make these lower receivers without serial numbers. The rest of the parts were bought as spare parts. And they put these rifles together and they were smuggling them down to the Nicaraguan Contras. It was another regime change going on, like we're seeing in the present day. And the way they funded it was they were bringing cocaine back along those same smuggler aircraft into the United States to sell to your children. And all under the watchful eye of then Governor Bill Clinton, who also set up this money laundry involving banks like Madison Guarantee, land flip deals like Whitewater, Flowerwood, Castle Grand, and the payments being paid out through an Arkansas state office, the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, ostensibly as business development loans to the companies that were supplying the guns and parts and other materials for the smuggling operation, but the loans were never repaid. That's how it all worked. And this is why the Clintons and their cronies have been so untouchable throughout the years. They've got the goods on the CIA. And the CIA will protect them, not because they like the Clintons, but in order to protect themselves. So the History Channel is out there talking about this, and that's a good thing. The American people need to understand a very simple truth. The biggest drug smuggler in the country is the country. And everybody is dirty with that money. And it's a big stain on the soul of our nation. Now then, let's talk a little bit about computers here. As you're probably aware, a lot of people who are trying to quit smoking have switched over to these e-cigs. And many of these e-cigs will recharge themselves off the USB port on your computer, which sounds like it's really, really convenient, but security researchers are starting to discover these e-cigs with chips inside that are inserting malware onto the computer over that USB port. You should never plug anything into the USB port that you do not know exactly what it is or where it came from. There have even been flash drives coming from companies like China that have malware on them. And you really do need to be very careful about that. So, all righty, let's talk about Hanford over in Washington State. As you know, they've had several accidents over there where these tunnels used to store fuel rods, spent fuel rods for reprocessing, have been collapsing. And there's a big concern about leaking radiation. As it turns out, apparently radiation has been leaking out of Hanford for a very long time. And apparently it's leaking into the Columbia River, which is the largest river in the Pacific Northwest region. And they can't stop it. They don't have the money. There's no money to stop it. Hanford goes back to the 1940s as part of the Manhattan Project. Technically, it was decommissioned after the Cold War, leaving behind some 53 million gallons of high-level radioactive waste. It has been proposed as a Superfund site in 1988, but it's still not there. Everybody downstream is being exposed to this stuff. All right, we're going to do a shout-out to our network affiliates who are just now rejoining our network here. Now, interestingly enough, over at the Dakota Access Pipeline, remember that big stink where the Lakota were very concerned? The pipeline had been moved onto their tribal land in violation of treaty to get it away from a nearby town full of white people. And there was a big stink, and they went to court, and the court basically said the pipeline can go through. This was at the state level. And there was a lot of violence, a lot of underhanded skullduggery on the part of the pipeline people and their security companies. But apparently, at federal level, things have just changed. Washington, D.C. District Court Judge James Brosberg has ruled in favor of the tribe, the Lakota tribe, saying that the Army Corps of Engineers building that Dakota Access Pipeline cannot make any decisions about the impacts of the oil spill. See, where it all came on down is they wanted an environmental assessment of what could happen. And by the way, that pipeline is already leaking. It's not even running at full capacity, and it's already leaking. And the Army Corps of Engineers basically came on out and said, we have evaluated it. It's going to be perfectly safe. And the judge is saying the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't have that authority. It should have been referred to the EPA. Now, what remedy they're going to do, I don't know. But at this point, the story is not over, and it's a classic case of politics overriding science, politics overriding the rights of people to have a safe, healthy environment in which to live. Okay, now then, a very alarming story that came out of IntelliHub. As you know, we've been hearing all these stories lately about these mass ocean die-offs, dead fish washing up on the beaches along the West Coast. Coral reefs are dying at an accelerated rate. And, of course, Al Gore is out there saying, see, it's all global warming. See, I tried to warn you in my movie. Well, apparently, the latest research is showing that the massive use of Roundup, glyphosate, on farm fields, and subsequent runoff into the water supply is what's causing these oceans to die off. There are now dead zones emerging wherever farm runoff is pouring into the ocean. And apparently it is a rapidly growing problem. Monsanto is still trying to deny that there's anything wrong with it. This could turn out to be as big a disaster as DDT. Remember the book, The Silent Spring, where they were just spraying DDT on everything and it wound up killing off benign life forms. Now, over in Europe, there is a petition drive going on, and more than 1 million people have signed the petition demanding that the European Union ban glyphosate over the concern that it causes cancer. And the European citizens are not being fooled by the lobbying or advertising. And, of course, over at Monsanto, they're out there saying, oh, pshaw, you cancer, you people are so picky. What's a little cancer? We're making money here. Okay. Now then, France is now going to mandate more childhood vaccines. They have 3 now. They're jumping it to 11. The same trend we saw over here. Vaccines are mandatory. Horrible things will happen if you don't use them. We know down in Australia they're actually talking about literally removing children from homes if they do not have all their vaccinations here. Right now over in Italy, there are major protests against their new law for mandatory vaccines, and apparently a lot of the Italian parents are saying they're going to leave Italy rather than have this stuff pumped into their kids. Now, over the last couple of days, you have probably noticed a renewed ad campaign for the HPV vaccine, about how you should give it to children who are 11 and 12, not because they're sexually active, but because it'll help prevent certain cancers. And by the way, if you listen to the language very carefully, they're not saying it does. They're saying it could save you, it could protect. It's a big maybe, it's a big question mark. So there's this article that's over at jeffreyjackson.com where it's basically talking about how this whole HPV Gardasil vaccine program is just this coordinated fraud. Sorry about that. And more damaging information is coming on out. As you know, over in Europe, a lot of girls who were given Gardasil came down with narcolepsy. Can't stay awake. They just keep nodding off. And there have been other serious adverse reactions. And it's very alarming to see a medical industry backed up by a government that is so intent on selling more product that they're simply not concerned with whether it even works, or even worse, if it's causing harm, which it seems to be doing. That lust for those stacks of ink and paper has destroyed what used to be the best qualities of being an American: concern, care for each other, the Hippocratic principle. First of all, do no harm. Amazon, as you know, is buying the Whole Foods chain. They're already announcing major staff layoffs. And we do need to be concerned. People go to Whole Foods because they're trying to avoid GMO. They're trying to avoid chemicals. Amazon, according to this article over in Government Slaves, has been selling ground turmeric root powders. And somebody got some and did an analysis on it and found it contains huge amounts of lead. Now remember, our guest tomorrow is Dr. Renee Default, who's going to be talking about mercury in high fructose corn syrup. How do these toxic heavy metals get into these products? You can't think of how they could get there by accident, but they're there. Down in Tanzania, Monsanto has scored a big victory. GMOs are now enforced by law. Farmers who try and grow traditional seeds can go to jail. And boy, oh boy, that right there is fascism. Al Gore, as you know, is making the rounds. He's got his new movie coming out this summer, an inconvenient sequel. He's trying to build an audience for it. Doesn't look like it's going to do very well. But he's basically back out there saying, give me your money and your freedom or face global warming. And by the way, they're still having to bulldoze the snow out of the mountain roads out in California here. And we're not out of the woods yet on this, because this record snowfall, when it does melt, we're going to see some serious flooding across America's West. So this is not going away anytime soon. All righty, let's see. I actually have run off the end of my talking points here. I was expecting a few more phone calls. So let's go back and recap what's going on over in Syria, because it's a very serious situation out there. Over the weekend, a U.S. Fa-18 Super Hornet shot down a Syrian Sukhoi 22. The official U.S. government position is the Sukhoi was attacking some of the U.S.-backed rebels who are trying to bring down Bashar al-Assad. And the U.S. says they have a right to defend themselves and their allies inside Syria. Actually, no, they don't. The U.S. does not have a right to be there. They basically invaded the place. They've been trying to get rid of Bashar al-Assad for over 5 years. And they're trying to make it palatable to you, the American public, by saying that this is all about the war on ISIS and Al-Qaeda. It's ISIS and Al-Qaeda. We're going after them. But they keep missing them. And they keep hitting the Syrian government forces that are trying to corral these rebels. There was a big stink over the last 2 weeks about how the U.S. literally attacked pro-Syrian government forces 3 different times, apparently to blow holes in the lines to allow ISIS and Al-Qaeda to escape. So what the U.S. is saying and what they're doing are 2 completely different things. Now, obviously, the shoot-down of this Sukhoi is a very dangerous escalation. You're 1 degree of separation away from an outright conflict between U.S. forces and Russian forces. Now, the Syrian government, the Russian military, and even the Kurds are saying this airplane was actually attacking ISIS when the U.S. shot it down. So Russia has basically ended the cooperation agreement where they were going to stay out of each other's way. Russia's very angry that the United States did not notify Russia ahead of time, which was part of that agreement. So the agreement is now basically over, and Russia is saying that any U.S. aircraft west of the Euphrates can be targeted. Now, they've stopped short of saying they're just going to shoot it down automatically, but obviously any U.S. warplanes or drones that are attacking forces on the ground are going to be a target, and the U.S., at least for the moment, appears to be kind of backing off on that situation. But I think what's going on over in Syria, and you know what's really amazing? Remember earlier in the year where things seemed to be steadying down. The Syrian government was almost in control of Syria. Even the U.S. was saying they were ready to accept Assad's continued presidency, and it was all toning down. Then there was that false flag in Idlib, followed by that harebrained cruise missile attack onto the Syrian air base. Most of those cruise missiles actually missed the target. Those that hit didn't hit anything important. The base was back in operation 24 hours later. And all of a sudden we're back to this same thing about, you know, Assad must go, Syria bad, Syria bad. We're getting into another quagmire over there. We've already been there 5 years. We've been in Afghanistan 15 years. Somebody has to wake up and realize this policy isn't working any longer. And worse, nobody is fooled by the propaganda. Nobody is believing that these countries deserve this kind of treatment. As I mentioned earlier in the show, look at the world's least peaceful nations around the globe, and they all share that common factor. They've had democracy brought to them by the United States of America. I think it's time for all Americans to stand up and say, enough is enough. Because we are risking outright war with Russia and with China. And on the day when the U.S. government realizes they cannot prevail with the conventional weapons, they'll resort to the nukes. And that's going to be a bad day for anybody not wearing 2 million sunblock. The time to become an anti-war protester is right now. We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Join us on the air, 800-313-9443. Aloha America, welcome back to our show here, and the corporate media is going on about the van plowing into the Muslims outside the mosque. And again, earlier in the show, we pointed out how the media is saying lone wolf, yet witnesses on the ground are saying that there were at least 3 men inside the van, so it's beginning to look like this is being done for some political purpose. And I have to laugh because on the Fox News channel, Spectrum Cable TV/Internet is advertising their wonderful service, which is anything but, and it continues to be problematic. We are not getting the bandwidth we pay for. And again, Spectrum has actually been sued in some states for false advertising, for promising 300 megabits per second and delivering 30. Somebody just sent me this article. This is over at Natural News, which is a really good resource, by the way. Apparently this group, Moms Across America, has just released a new video called Communities Rising. And it's talking about the toxicity of GMOs and glyphosate. And glyphosate is a toxin. It's declared a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization. Now, the problem with the GMOs is not the altered DNA, but the proteins formed by the altered DNA, the protein expression. Because these are proteins we have not co-evolved with. They're brand new. And you will ingest them, and your cells will try and fit them into the receptor sites where the normal protein would go, and they don't quite fit, which can lead to all kinds of medical consequences. In fact, I'm still curious if that Morgellons disease outbreak a few years ago might have been a GMO accident. First of all, it did happen around areas where test fields were being planted, and researchers apparently found plant DNA inside those fibers that were growing out of people's skin. And again, genetic engineering is the most dangerous technology we've ever played with. We're tinkering with the very code of life itself. You can make a mistake. Who knows what can happen? Who knows what can happen at all? Look at all the mistakes they make with vaccines. Now we're getting an updated story from Syria. Apparently the Syrian soldiers have managed to kick ISIS out of the town of Rasafa in Raqqa. And so now they're celebrating there. And they're making good gains. If it wasn't for the U.S. getting in the way, which the Syrian forces are saying, that's what the U.S. is doing. They get in the way. They create escape routes for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And you have to wonder what is going to be the next stage of this, because the U.S. government has a problem. They keep telling us it's all about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and yet clearly they are supporting ISIS and Al-Qaeda and going after the Syrian government forces and their allies. Are they going to try another false flag chemical attack someplace? Oh, he's using chemical weapons. You know, Assad is tearing tags off the couch cushions. Assad passes wind in the elevators, or whatever else they're going to say about him. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the show, Amazon is acquiring Whole Foods, and the news is not good. They're slashing jobs. They're going to pull back on the cashiers. They're probably going to switch to automated self-checkout. And worse, they are going to change to cheaper products in a price war with Walmart. And so they're going to destroy the brand. I think this is a very, very reckless move where you're going to destroy the brand that made that company. So, and I understand that Amazon has huge amounts of money and they can afford a mistake or a whoopsie. But again, if they go to cheaper products that turn out to have chemicals and GMO, they will destroy their own brand. And we have a Whole Foods here on Oahu. Unfortunately, it's over at the other end of the island. So we tend to use the local down-to-earth at the bottom of the hill. And there's also a GNC in our mall that we go to every once in a while. We're going to take a break for commercials. Phone lines, again, are open, 800-313-9443. Do call on in and help me finish up this show. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Coming up toward the end of the program here. And a quick reminder, tomorrow our third-hour guest is Renee Dufault. She is going to be talking about mercury found in high fructose corn syrup. On Wednesday, Miriam Azizi, she's an activist regarding family rights in Israel. She's going to be talking to us about some developments over there. Meanwhile, let's go back to the phones here. Jeff in Minnesota, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, hi. You said something about about the Federal Reserve and the Bank of North Dakota. What's that all about?
Well, the Bank of North Dakota is a state bank. It's run by the state of North Dakota, and it's being run for the benefit of the state and the people rather than a for-profit operation. And again, if you go back and you look at the history of the United States when it was first started, the reason we fought the American Revolution was to get away from this private central banking model, in that case the Bank of England, which would simply print up banknotes and then loan them out at interest, so that the bankers made the lion's share of the profit from all economic activity. And the early colonies, of course, had printed their own currency by the government in order to avoid having to pay interest to the Bank of England. So King George III passed the Currency Act, which ordered everybody in the colonies to use these banknotes borrowed at interest from the Bank of England, and that was really a prime cause of the American Revolution. Now, of course, when we got our latest version of the private central bank, the Federal Reserve, our schools were encouraged to stop talking about the Currency Act and reframe the revolution in terms of tea in Boston Harbor and Paul Revere's ride and the rest of it. But private central banking does not serve the community. It doesn't serve the people. It serves itself. It's a for-profit venture. And I would argue that it's actually unconstitutional, because the Constitution gives the government the right to coin all money and regulate its value, and does not authorize the delegation of that authority to a private company. And but we've had it for 100 years, and the result is that we are all hopelessly in debt, which is the end result of any country enslaved to a private central bank, as we're seeing all across Europe right now.
And how do we get out of it? I mean, I see that all the, the money made from drugs goes just to pull all the money off the street that's pumped in from the central bank.
Well, the specific economic activity isn't really so much the issue. We need to go back to the monetary system our nation started with, which was the government creates the money, they coin the money, the paper notes are just claim checks. The money is the metal in the coinage. And the government would then spend that money into circulation to buy what the government needed. It would flow through commerce without accruing any interest, and then the government would tax it back at the end of the cycle in the same amount, no additional interest needed, to balance the books and close the cycle. And that was the economic system that allowed a very young United States of America to become very quickly a world economic power.
I mean, you can just see that people have suitcases full of 20s, but nobody will want them because they've got a case of beans in the basement, and that's all they can think about is something to eat.
Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, the end result of all of this inflation and money creation, first of all, the Federal Reserve is refusing to say how much new money they've created to pour all over Wall Street in the last few years. And ultimately, we're going to wind up like they did in Zimbabwe, where people are walking around with paper notes that say $100 trillion in their pockets, and it'll be completely and utterly worthless.
I had to pay $18 to park for 29 minutes downtown Minneapolis. It said $2 for the first 20 minutes, and after that it's $18. Yeah,
I'm afraid, we have the same problem here in Honolulu. The owners of those private parking lots just gouge people. They gouge the tourists. They figure they can get away with it.
And they say that we're going to need 18 to 30,000 more apartment buildings or apartments in the Twin Cities in the next few years. At the same time, every major road and artery is being reduced by one lane on each side for bike lanes. And they're putting up fixed barriers so you can't drive in the bike lanes. So they're trying to get us out of our cars.
Well, that's part of the Agenda 30. They want everybody out of the cars. We're dealing with it here in Hawaii with our light rail project, which has gone hideously over cost. It's very delayed. They're already having to go back and repair large sections of the track. It's not even in use yet. They're going to have to probably replace all the rail cars. They're defective. And now there's a movement here in Hawaii calling for a complete audit of the project to find out where all this money has gone, because it does feel like it's a boondoggle, and they could wind up scrapping the project, which would leave us with these little rails overhead as an eyesore. They're really not pleasant to look at. It's not the view of Hawaii the tourists want to see.
Maybe you could support tents for the homeless on those rails.
You probably could. You probably could. And but there's another thing that's going on. Believe it or not, even though our state is hovering dangerously close to bankruptcy, Hawaii, it looks like it's going to be the first state to pass a universal basic income. In other words, if you are below a certain level of income, the government is going to make it. It's another name for welfare, but they're calling it universal basic income. And I don't know how they're going to pay for it, because the state is broke, especially since TSA has ruined our tourism industry. You know, the state's in serious trouble.
That's for sure, everywhere. Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over to Apostle in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How are you, Mike?
Hanging in.
Hope you and Claire are okay. No issues.
Well, yeah, we're fine.
Okay, but you mentioned the other day about one of your friends had glaucoma.
Yes.
Yeah, I can give you a simple remedy for it, whatever, that will help your friend, and he won't have to go through any medical issues whatsoever.
Yes.
One teaspoon of cayenne pepper into a glass of orange juice.
Oh, okay.
Drink it every day. I have a friend of mine, he's 90 years old, and his brother became blind through glaucoma.
Mm-hmm.
He has glaucoma. He's been taking this, and it went away.
Well, I'll have to definitely take a look at that. That sounds really, really interesting.
Right. He even asked his doctor if it was possible to put the cayenne pepper into his eyes, and the doctor said, you know what, whatever the hell you're doing, keep up with it, because you don't have it. You do not have it. And whatever you're doing, just stay with that, and I don't want to go any further with it.
Okay, well, that's good to know. I mean, the reality is that in the history of medicine, there are a lot of very wonderful, powerful cures that are made out of natural materials. Unfortunately, they can't be patented. And in this get-rich-quick out of people's fear of being ill society, the pharmaceutical companies want to come up with new molecules, new chemicals that can be patented to maximize their profitability, and very often their synthetic medicines are nowhere near as good as the old home remedies that, you know, your grandfather and grandmother used to do. I have this wonderful book. I actually had a first edition of this book of herbal remedies from the turn of the 1900s. And I actually donated it to a museum, and then I found somebody had actually reprinted it, so I got into the copy. And there's a lot of really good stuff in there. And when you look at this attitude coming from the medical establishment that, you know, they're just there to sell you treatment after treatment after treatment, I get real skittish about going to doctors. Obviously, I had to go to the doctor when I had my pneumonia a few years back. But other than that, I just want to stay away because of all these horror stories.
Well, most people do, Mike. That's the thing.
Yeah.
But I'm giving you a remedy, whatever, to get rid of your friend's glaucoma. And you know what? He's gonna thank you for giving him to it.
Well, I'll tell you what. I will mention it to him. I will mention it to him. Of course, I think he likes his current treatment regimen, which of course is the pakalolo.
The thing is with this, he just drinks it, whatever. And you know what? My friend doesn't drink it all the time. He just drinks it when he feels he needs it at the moment now. He's been drinking it all his life.
All right.
Again, he's 90 years old.
Well, thank you very much for the information there, and we're going to let you go and switch over to Jerry in Chicago. Aloha, Jerry. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I'm just in regards to what the gentleman called in about that lived in Minneapolis, talking about the parking. You know, the last thing that Tricky Dick Daley did here, who was the mayor for, I don't know how many terms, and his father was part of the machine with the democratic system back in the 60s when the riots were going on.
Yes.
But he privatized all the parking meters around here. And then he went and got to work as a CEO, not an executive CEO, but a CEO of the parking meter company that he sold out to. After he was done being mayor and turned it over to Rahm Emanuel.
Well, I'm not surprised. We saw the same thing going on here in Hawaii. When we first moved here, there was plenty of public parking that was basically set aside by the city, and the parking was very, very reasonable. And over time, under our Democratic leadership, these parking lots have been sold off into private hands, and, of course, the parking has become hideously expensive now.
Well, I hear you on that, and there's something else wrong with Chicago, is that every time, like, they build a school or something like that, it's as if they have no clue of how many people will be showing up in cars every day to work at the school. And the people are forced to park on the streets. Well, all the streets, you have to have a permit to park there. So if there's a Sox game or a Cubs game and they don't recognize the car with the permit in the window, which is about $160, you get towed away. So I just wanted to leave you with that. I think all these big cities are the final trap for grabbing you by the ankles and shaking all the loose change out of your pocket.
Well, I agree with that, and I think it's more than just simple greed. I think the reality is that all of these governments at all levels are hopelessly broke and deep in debt, and right now pillaging and plundering the population is the only option they've got left.
Yeah, well, the population that they're pillaging is the working class right now. And I mean, I thought I heard something 3 years ago that said something to the point where you are taxed to the point of about 67%. So 67 cents of every dollar you earn is basically going into somebody else's hands, not yours.
That's that sounds about right here. Most people, when they get their paycheck and they look at that withholding stub and they say, oh, it's not that bad, what you're forgetting about is your employer has to pay taxes for the government's permission to give you a job. And if you take those employment taxes and add them to what is withheld from your paycheck, you will discover that, yes, in point of fact, government at all levels is making more off of your work than you are. And that ratio of 50% for yourself, 50% for the masters is exactly the same ratio that we had in the antebellum South under slavery, the medieval serfs, or the Roman slaves. Those are the numbers. That's how it works.
Well, okay, I just wanted to voice my opinion for a minute. Thank you very much. Thanks for all the good work you do. Have a good day.
Same to you. Thank you very much here. Somebody just wrote on in asking if this van attack in London, where there seems to be some confusion how many people were actually in the car, may be an attempt by Theresa May to show her humanity, because she came out of that Grenfell Tower debacle seriously damaged. And it's entirely possible. This disparity between the official number of people in the van and what the witnesses are saying suggests it was some kind of a covert operation, false flag. Who knows? Okay, the Homes and Community Agency is the UK state regulatory body for social housing, and its job is to monitor the performance, finances, and provision of services of landlords. And apparently they dropped the ball rather badly when it came to the Grenfell Tower here. It's kind of an interesting story here, and it's a reminder to people who, like me, have a classified past. Apparently, this woman was out at the trash that she shared with the neighbor, and the neighbor apparently has moved away and just threw a bunch of classified NASA information in the trash bin. That's not what you're supposed to do with it. And apparently a lot of information that could have led to identity theft here. Story coming out of Investment Watchdog saying it is time for somebody to appoint a special counsel to investigate Hillary Clinton, to investigate the email server, to investigate if Comey committed obstruction of justice, if Loretta Lynch committed obstruction of justice. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. It's time for Trump to go on the offensive. He has played rope-a-dope long enough. He's got to come out swinging. He needs to put on his presidential brass knuckles and just come on out and start fighting back against the swamp things. Because the reality is that they're going to keep this up. The Russia collusion, that didn't work. Obstruction of justice, when that doesn't work, what else will they come up with? They're going to keep going until they find something that can basically shut him down, or at least keep him hamstrung. They're trying to keep him so busy with all of this swampiness that he can't carry out his agenda. And then they'll go into the campaign 2020 saying, well, Trump said he was going to do this and he couldn't do it. And Trump said he was going to do that and he was going to do that. And it's obstructionist. Trump needs to regain the initiative, especially against Hillary Clinton. He campaigned on putting Hillary Clinton in jail. I want that promise kept. So do most Americans. I grieve to see this country where the rich and powerful are able to get away with what they're able to get away with. That's not the way the nation is supposed to be. People who do bad things are supposed to be corrected on that. And yes, I saw a lot of this kind of thing in Hollywood, and I've been watching it in government all this time. We all stood there and cheered Trump saying, lock her up, lock her up. The time has come to do that. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Last segment of our program today here. And basically just finishing up a couple of stories here. A little bit of good news for the right to keep and bear arms story coming out of PatriotRising.com. Apparently, armed homeowner captures 2 cop-killing fugitives that escaped days before. There was another story we put on up where a homeowner armed with a machete defeated a home invasion gang that had a shotgun. I wouldn't recommend going up against a shotgun with a machete, but again, most criminals, they're not expecting a pushback, and it'll catch them by shock here. Article coming out of Patriot Rising saying that violence abroad leads to violence at home, and it does seem to be, that's happening. It's coming here. All this violence, all this civil unrest that we have spawned in all these countries for regime change, it's coming back to haunt us here. A little bit of good news, getting back to Grenfell Tower. Apparently massive donations have come on in for the care and aid of the survivors. Unfortunately, they're now saying 58 people died in that horrible, horrible fire, but people are stepping up to the plate to help them out here. Apparently, a marketing company working for the Republican National Committee accidentally left sensitive personal details of almost 62% of the U.S. population exposed. This is the largest breach of electoral data in the U.S. to date. 198 million Americans' personal data. I think it's time to pull back from all this computerization until we can deal with the issues of security and privacy. Because it's almost like the politicians just don't care anymore. You know, spying is the new normal. Lack of privacy is the new normal. What are you complaining about here? Apparently, Google is planning to increase censorship on YouTube, filtering out content that glorifies terrorism. And the claim is 23-year-old Salman Abedi was radicalized after watching videos of an American preacher posted on the site. I'm not sure how real that is. You don't watch a video and all of a sudden get turned into a terrorist. It takes a long time and a lot of very ugly incidents to make somebody go through that kind of a change. It just doesn't happen watching a video. It just doesn't here. Apparently Ron Paul is out there stepping back up to this whole central bank thing. He's been quoted as saying, when I say cut taxes, I don't mean fiddle with the code. I mean abolish the income tax and the IRS and replace them with nothing, which I'm sure probably most of us would be very happy to see. Because we're already taxed way, way, way too much. And it's time to try and go the other way. The more they tax us, the slower the economy gets. Let's go the other way. Remember the Reagan tax cut? They cut a bunch of taxes. The economy lit up. The GDP went up, and tax revenues actually increased at lower tax rates. But politicians are greedy. All right, we're going to head on out of here. I got to do Jim Goddard's show. We'll be back tomorrow here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Have a good day, and aloha, America.